Hello, how are you doing? Hey guys, this video series is going to be really exciting. This is the first of 5 videos where I build a simple web chat client deployed in Amazon S3 that integrates with ChatGPT using ChatGPT's API. In part 5, when I'm done building this system, I will test it end-to-end using a desktop browser. Today, in part 1, I'll introduce the overall system. Additionally, I will acquire a web domain using Route 53 and get the web tier of our web chat client deployed in Amazon S3. So let me start by first introducing the larger end-to-end system. To build this system, I'm going to use quite a few AWS cloud services, including Amazon Route 53, Amazon CloudFront, AWS Certificate Manager, Amazon S3, Amazon API Gateway, AWS Lambda, AWS Secrets Manager, Amazon DynamoDB, and all of this will be integrated with OpenAI, ChatGPT through an API. Now follow along in this video and the entire video series, and let me show you how straightforward this is. By understanding this end-to-end system, you can begin to take your engineering career straight to the moon. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to quickly provide an overview of what I'm going to build in this entire video series. After that, I will acquire a web domain, and then I will step through building and configuring the web chat client portion of the system. Next, using a browser, I will test just this part of the system. Lastly, I'll summarize the key points you should take away from this video. Okay, so I'm really excited. Let's get into this. In this video series, I'm going to build my system in US East 1, also known as the North Virginia region. You don't have to use US East 1, but I'm picking one region to provision all of my regional AWS services. As I walk through building this system, there are areas I will cover fairly quickly. In these areas, I've already created YouTube videos where I walk viewers just like you step by step on how to configure these services. When I get to these areas, I will let you know, and as always, I will share the YouTube video links in the YouTube description. Okay, so let me go through the system diagram service by service. So the first thing I need to do is acquire a web domain. For this, I will use Route 53. I will acquire the web domain newmachina.us. With my new web domain, I will configure it to point to an Amazon CloudFront distribution. What is CloudFront? Well, CloudFront is a content delivery network, or CDN for short. CloudFront basically provides web scale caches residing in Amazon Edge locations all over the world. These CloudFront caches improve the overall response time for users accessing the web assets making up the web chat client. Within Amazon CloudFront, I will create a CloudFront distribution. The CloudFront distribution will be configured with an origin pointing to the Amazon S3 bucket containing my web assets, which implement my web chat client. CloudFront will be configured to use an SSL certificate. I will create this SSL certificate using AWS Certificate Manager. The next service I will use in this system is Amazon S3. S3 is ideal for hosting web assets that make up a static website. My custom web chat client will be deployed into an S3 bucket and will be implemented using simple HTML, JavaScript, and the jQuery library. Users with browsers accessing my web chat client homepage will be able to engage in an interactive chat session with ChatGPT. My custom web chat client will make API calls back to an API endpoint I'm going to create and make available an Amazon API Gateway. The API Gateway will forward API calls to a Lambda function which integrates with ChatGPT through an API. The AWS Lambda will use an OpenAI API key, which I will acquire from OpenAI and will be safely stored in AWS Secrets Manager. The AWS Lambda will store the conversational state between the web chat client user and ChatGPT in a DynamoDB table. This allows the user to have a more normal flowing conversation with ChatGPT. Okay, this is a lot. Let's start having some real fun and let's get into this. So as I shared earlier in this video, I'm going to focus on acquiring my web domain using Route 53 and deploying the web tier of my web chat client into Amazon S3. First, I navigate to the Amazon Route 53 homepage and I click the Get Started button. Quick note, Route 53 is a global AWS service, one of the few services that's not specific to a region. So I do not have to select the US East 1 North Virginia region. I select Register a Domain and I click the Get Started button. I search for the web domain newmachina.us and I follow the workflow to buy the domain. If you're interested in seeing the detailed steps, you can watch a video on my channel called Amazon Route 53 as your GoDaddy. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. After I acquire my web domain, newmachina.us, Route 53 automatically creates a hosted zone for my new domain. I click the Hosted Zones link on the left-hand panel, and now I see all of my hosted zones in the Route 53 Hosted Zone Summary page. In my case, I have just one hosted zone, and it's for my new web domain, newmachina.us, and so I click the newmachina.us Hosted Zone link. When you get a new hosted zone, it comes pre-populated with two records. The first is an SOA record and the second is an NS record. I explain the role of these record types in detail in another video on my channel named URL to IP Address Translation in AWS Cloud. Check it out if you're interested in learning more about hosted zones and record types. So now, let's look at the system diagram to see where I am in building this system. Now that I have my web domain, newmachina.us, I'm going to move to the next part of the system. I'm going to deploy a static website hosted in Amazon S3. I navigate to the Amazon S3 homepage in the AWS console. This is another step I will cover at a high level. You will probably get tired of this, but yes, I do have another video, Amazon S3 as your static web server, where I deploy a simple website into the same S3 bucket I'm using in this video. Check it out for detailed steps describing this if you're interested. Now, continuing at a high level, I create the bucket in the US East 1 North Virginia region and I give it a generic name. In my case, I name it video-000301-bucket. After I create the bucket, I click into the bucket detail homepage. In the bucket detail page, I click Properties. I scroll down the Properties homepage. Under the Static Web Hosting section, I click the Edit button. I enable Static Web Hosting, and at that point a form appears. In the form, I go ahead and specify my index file with a file named index.html and my error file named error.html. I click the Save Changes button. Now, I can see that the static web hosting is enabled for my S3 bucket. I copy the static website URL to my clipboard. I will use this same URL to test the static website in a few minutes. Staying in the bucket detail page, I click Permissions. Under Permissions, I disable Block All Public Access. After this, I add a bucket policy allowing public access to the objects in the bucket. Here's the template of the bucket policy I entered. You can read this policy and get a sense of what it does. S3:getObject is the action. Allowed is the effect. This means that the action, getObject, is allowed. The principal is notated by an asterisk. This means everyone can execute the getObject action. The resource is going to be my bucket name. All objects in my bucket are included because of the wildcard, which is notated by the asterisk at the end of the bucket name. Now I upload 2 HTML files and 1 CSS file into my new S3 bucket. The 3 files comprise my website, which is the web tier portion of my end-to-end system implementing my web chat client. Now let's quickly test if I can bring up my custom web chat client in a browser. I launch a browser on my laptop, in my case Chrome, using the static S3 bucket URL I just copied into my clipboard a few minutes ago. I paste it into the browser and hit enter. Nice. I see my website. It successfully loaded directly from S3. Now the system is not completely built out yet, so the functionality behind clicking the buttons will not work. But I have tested that the S3 website is successfully being loaded into the browser, so this part of the system is working, which is exactly what I wanted to test. Let's quickly look at the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that make up this website, which implements the web tier of my web chat client. Using Visual Studio Code, which is running on my laptop, let's look at the specific web files that make up the web tier. The error.html file is the first file we can look at. It's pretty simple. It just indicates there's an error if S3 is unable to render the main index.html web page. The next file I can look at is the website.css file. This just contains all my CSS styles used in the website. This last file is the index.html file. This is really the most important file within the web tier of the system. It renders all of the HTML elements, such as buttons and edit boxes, and it contains a JavaScript to handle the dynamic behavior associated with the website. I'm using the jQuery JavaScript library to help me implement much of that JavaScript logic. The first function I want to introduce is fill table with results. This JavaScript function is called when we want to get the previous question-answer results to render in the HTML. The second area of JavaScript I want to introduce is the event handlers. When the users click buttons, the JavaScript event handlers wake up and make API calls to our backend system, which I'll cover further along in this video series. The responses in the API calls contain the previous question-answer conversation between the web user and ChatGPT. This will eventually get rendered into the HTML page. Again, more on this later in this video series. Quick note on these hard-coded URLs that are used to make the API calls to the backend system when the buttons are clicked. The URL prefix in these calls will be defined in the Amazon API Gateway. There is an API Gateway setting called Invoke URL, which defines the URL prefix that I should use in these JavaScript API calls. Again, more on this later in this video series when I get to this part of the system. The last part I want to cover in the index.html file is toward the bottom of the file, and this is the HTML itself. You can see that the HTML is quite simple. We have some divs, one edit box, and 2 buttons, where the buttons are attached to the JavaScript event handlers I just covered. That's it. You can see that this website, which implements this web chat client, is pretty simple. Of course, this web chat client needs a backend system to call, and that is what I will be working on in later videos. In summary, this is the first video of a 5-part video series where I build an end-to-end web chat client. To build this system, I will use quite a few Amazon services. Specifically, I will use Amazon Route 53, Amazon CloudFront, AWS Certificate Manager, Amazon S3, Amazon API Gateway, AWS Lambda, AWS Secrets Manager, Amazon DynamoDB, and all of this will be integrated with OpenAI's ChatGPT through an API. Today is the first of 5 videos in this video series, and I acquired the web domain using Route 53, and I built and deployed the web tier into Amazon S3. If you decide to build this end-to-end system on your own, I strongly encourage you to test subsystems along the way. An example of testing along the way in this video was testing the web chat client with a browser and making sure it could be loaded directly from S3. This helped me confirm that the S3 static web hosting configuration was correct. As we move through this video series, I will show you more ways to test along the way, and I strongly encourage you to follow this best practice. My goal in this video series is to demonstrate a simple end-to-end web chat client that is integrated with OpenAI's ChatGPT. I did not focus heavily on a production security footprint. One high-level thing that comes to mind to improve security would be using Amazon Cognito for user authentication and authorization at the web chat client layer. With Cognito, I could force web users to sign in before using the web chat client. Okay, thanks for watching. All videos referenced will be listed in the YouTube description. Check them out to get more details in areas that I covered at a high level. I invite you to watch other videos on my channel. If you like the way I'm patching up this content, please consider subscribing. One last thing, we all love technology, and we're all excited about the innovation in the cloud and machine learning and AI, but don't forget to carve out some time to live in the real world. Go outside, go swimming, go hiking, go surfing, go climbing. Get out and move your body. And if you do, tell me in the comments. I want to hear about it. With that, have a great day. Thank you.